Greetings, you sexy bastards. On this fine Sunday morning, I want to share some thoughts that I had about, I guess, the nature of restraint. So I talk about discipline a lot, and I think there are kind of two different types of discipline. There's active discipline, and then there's like restraint, right? There's the discipline to do and the discipline not to do, and these are kind of different skills. And today I want to focus on the discipline of not to do. So this kind of feeling of restraint, this ability to resist the urge to take some action. So you have an addiction to smoking pot, or you are very driven by your anger and you get these intense sensations of anger and they push you to want to do something. And I think what I'm going to talk about today can also apply to things like insecurity. I mean, insecurity is something that holds you back from acting socially in the ways that you'd want to act socially. And it's about resisting these emotions. But when you resist insecurity, when you resist envy, when you resist lust and anger and greed and all of these things, and when you resist cravings for certain substances, it doesn't actually it doesn't actually help you get over it, right? It doesn't heal you, it doesn't move you past it, it doesn't solve the problem. More often than not, what it does is it turns into suppression or repression. And these are two different phenomena, psychologically speaking. I don't remember which is which. One is the unconscious pushing away of some psychic content, and the other is the conscious pushing away of some psychic content. But I don't think that's too important for what we're talking about here. I guess we're talking more about the conscious pushing away of some psychic content or some psychological factors. So let's take the example of smoking weed. You want to smoke weed, and or let's take the example of anger or whatever. You have this impulse. I guess ultimately what we're talking about here is impulse control. You have some impulse that makes you want to take some action, or is holding you back from taking action that you want. And that could also, I guess laziness, sloth could also be counted in this category. And so to get to the damn point, what I'm trying to express here is a system for exercising restraint that doesn't translate into repression. Repression gives that psychological force more power, gives that impulse more power. If you're insecure and you're pushing that insecurity away and forcing yourself to act confident, you're not coming from a place of true confidence. And people can see this all the time. When you're angry and you're pushing that anger away, you're denying it, you're repressing it, that anger just gets bottled up inside and it expresses itself in other undesirable ways. And I think in the world of emotional regulation, this is something that people really struggle with, because then when so you have on one side people who repress, they push away, and it becomes bottled up and it starts to control them in undesirable ways. And that's how you build a very strong shadow. If you're a fan of Carl Jung, and I won't go into what that is if you're not, or people swing to the other side and they don't want to repress these things, where they're just weak, and so they indulge these things. And of course, indulgence isn't great. We've seen people we all know people who indulge all of their impulses, and that doesn't look good. It's wallowing in your misery. It's I've got one buddy who he will not build a social life. He won't meet girls. He won't go out. And it's because he is indulging his insecurity and allowing it to keep him locked away in his room, watching TV and playing video games. So what do we do about this? What we do is we have to create processes to create state changes. So let's say we're in a state of craving, right? So this is, for me, this is gluttony, I think, is what this could be categorized as. So Years ago when I was in high school, I had a massive substance abuse issue. I never say I was an addict because I did everything under the sun, but I never built physical addictions that forced me to go to rehab, such as a lot of my friends did. I had some friends who were addicted to Xanax to the extent that when they went to rehab, they had to be fed Xanax, otherwise they would literally die from withdrawals. I was never there. But I did struggle with a lot of substance abuse, especially with weed. That was kind of the one drug that remained constant through everything, a lot of Adderall, and then I think my buddy said we tried like 37 different drugs or some shit like that. But the one that I really felt cravings for was weed. Like, I never really felt cravings. I drank a shit ton, but I never felt cravings for alcohol. I felt cravings for weed. And when I was sobering up and I was trying to resist the urge, I guess I make this distinction to say, like, I don't know if this would necessarily work if you're addicted to meth, but if you're addicted to sugar, if you're addicted to weed, if you're addicted to porn, if you're addicted to video games, if you're addicted to anger, if you're controlled by your anger, this is where it might be applicable. So I'm trying to quit weed, and it was pretty bad. I wasn't able to sleep. I would wake up in cold sweats when I could sleep. I was having these outrageously, just wild dreams, which was kind of cool. And then I was just riddled with anxiety, negative thoughts, really just a lot of inner demons, inability to focus, inability to eat, nausea. I was not having it, man. And then just the desire and that craving to use that substance. And so the system that I created to change my state looked something like, okay, I have a craving to smoke pot. What do? I could smoke weed, or I could not. But I didn't have the self-control or the discipline to not smoke weed, right? I didn't have the self-control to just say, like, I'm not gonna smoke weed today. And I tried that. I tried that for months and months, just, I'm gonna grit it out and I'm just not gonna smoke weed. And then what happened is maybe sometimes I would get through, but then the next day I would smoke weed, or, you know, I would get through a week and then I would indulge substantially and go on a bender and all this bullshit. So that wasn't necessarily working. And I was like, why will just pure willpower not work? And I'm generally, at least in the perceptions of my friends, what people have told me, relatively well disciplined. I'm good at just exerting a decent amount of willpower to force myself through difficult things, but it wasn't working. So, and I guess I developed a lot of that through this. So I had to do something different. And what I eventually discovered was the state change process. So I'd be in a state of craving substances, and I would recognize that I was in that state, and I would recognize that forcing my way through that would result in repression, which is not good. So instead, I started creating a system. The first kind of system that I had would be something along the lines of, okay, I'm craving this right now. What I'm gonna do is just get practice resisting this urge. I did this with cigarettes as well, so it worked in multiple contexts. And I was violently addicted to cigarettes. Get practice, get an experience of resisting this craving. And that doesn't mean I'm never gonna do it again. It means I'm gonna let myself do it in, you know, let's say I'm starting off. First time I say, I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. If I can get through 10 minutes of not smoking pot, I'll call that a success. If I smoke pot after that, so be it, man, so be it. So then that evolves and I get longer and longer, but ultimately it's like, okay, I'm resisting smoking weed until tonight or until the weekend, things like that. And ultimately it becomes unbalanced. And so the next thing that I add on to that is, okay, I'm going to resist smoking pot, and then when I do, I'm going to smoke less, or I'm going to smoke just this, I'm going to smoke just CBD, pure CBD, and then that'll help with that. Obviously with cigarettes, I couldn't do that. So with cigarettes, I started to replace them with toothpicks, and toothpicks would help that craving go away. And once that craving subsided, and I gave basically more time between my initial impulse and the time that I would let myself give into it, it would give some buffer time for that craving to subside. And in that moment of craving, it's like you have to push that away and that craving gets stored up somewhere. But when you allow that craving to exist and you just make a deal with that craving, okay, I'll humor you, but further down that road, then that you give that craving time to subside, and then at that point, let's say you push it away, well, now you've pushed away a much smaller force, or you've allowed it to dissipate. So let's say you're struggling with anger, and again, it's like every craving you're going to have to create a different system for. If it's food and sugar that you're addicted to, and like you're hungry, you're going to be a lot more susceptible to eating unhealthy food when you're hungry. So you're just going to sit down and say like, okay, I'll eat. And I've actually done this. I don't have like an eating problem of any kind, although I arguably should eat more. But I'd say, okay, like I found myself eating a lot of cookies last semester. I was like, I gotta chill out on the cookies. And what I noticed is when I went into the cafeteria, I'd walk by the cookies and I'd grab a cookie and I'd fucking eat it. And I did have a bit of a sugar addiction, I think, so I could definitely feel like a craving for sugar. But what I'd start doing was eating my healthy food first, and then if I still wanted a cookie, then fine, I could eat a cookie. And I'd find that a lot of times after eating the healthy food, I'd be full and that craving would still be there, but it wasn't so strong that I have to put a great amount of effort into resisting it. I could just essentially relax through that craving, and I could let it exist without it being so powerful that it could drive my behaviors. If you're struggling with insecurity, it's not about fighting that insecurity. Again, it's about changing that state and creating a system that gets you out of it. So the first thing, and this I haven't really, I think, established any state change system for this, but I kind of have, is a lot of times if I'm going to a social event and I'm feeling hella insecure, just not outgoing or whatever, I'll give myself the permission and the time and the space to be introverted at that event. Like, I don't have to show up and just be Mr. saying hi to everybody right off the bat. I can be Mr. I'm gonna just sit on this couch, or I'm gonna hang out over here and I'm just gonna watch people. I'm just gonna hang out. I'm just gonna vibe. And what I've noticed a lot of times is people would then start coming to me, and when people came to me, they were much more, I guess, willing to engage. And often, if you're in that more insecure mindset, you're not in a state where you really want to talk about yourself that much, right? You don't want to give some whole monologue. And so I just learned how to be a good listener and a good question asker. And again, I'm not fighting any insecurity. Somebody comes to me, I'm allowing that insecurity to exist. I don't have to fight it in order to express what's going on in my life. I could just figure out, okay, what's the quickest way to turn this conversation around, get them talking, and then once I'm focused on what they're talking about, I'm not fighting the insecurity now. Now my attention has changed and I'm in a conversation, and then I just effortlessly kind of enter this conversational social flow, and that insecurity has dissipated, or that lack of confidence has dissipated, to allow me to be in this social flow, connecting with this person, and now me talking about myself unfolds effortlessly because I'm not fighting insecurity. It's just dissipated. So this is kind of what I mean about state change. A really good one that I found is certain impulses, like, let's say, I guess, okay, so I've also struggled with like anger, like getting really pissed off, and sometimes, especially like as a programmer, dude, old man, can code piss you off, and that shit can ruin my day. I've genuinely had days where I wake up and I start writing code and some shit is not working, and it pisses me off so much that I end up getting nothing done the remainder of the day. Every time I turn back to try and tackle that problem, I get pissed off, and then the frequency of my mind is just resonating at a bad frequency, and so I'm just attracting irritable circumstances, right? I think that's what the hippies might say, and frankly, I think the hippies are correct there. Like, when you're in an angry state, you start to just find more and more events around you that induce more anger. And you can argue that, oh, well, it's just because you're in an angry state that you're interpreting events that would have happened otherwise as angry. I think anybody who's kind of struggled with anger and irritability as an emotional state with some level of self-awareness would agree that it seems like when you're angry, the universe starts to just hand you more things to be angry about beyond just your mode of interpretation. And why that is, who knows? But the point that I'm trying to make is it's ruined many of my days. And something that can help, right? A system that I've created to, instead of sit there and fight the anger, I'm not going to be an angry person. Instead is just take a deep breath. That's what everyone fucking says, is like, take 3 deep breaths, man. Assess, what do I value more in life? Would I rather live an angry life, an unhappy and angry life, but have everything go well? Or would I rather live a peaceful and easy life and not necessarily have success right here? So say you lost your keys and it's really pissing you off. You need to recognize that giving into and indulging that anger in that moment of losing your keys is kind of setting the threshold of what external circumstances can cause you to be angry to right here, which means all of these other circumstances, which are inevitably going to take place in the day-to-day inconveniences of life that do happen, are able to push you into that state, which means you're going to spend a lot of your time in life in that state. So then you have to decide in that moment, okay, do I want this to be capable of putting me in that state and live that angry life? Or do I want to just accept, you know what, I've lost my keys, I'm not going to give in to that anger, and I would rather not be able to find my keys than to be an angry person. And oftentimes when I really accept that, that's when I find my keys, right? And like I said before, you exist in that emotional state, you're going to attract, it's a law of attraction, you're going to attract those kinds of circumstances. So first you kind of put your mind, first you take those 3 deep breaths, and then all of a sudden, like when you take those 3 deep breaths, you don't have to resist the urge to punch a wall anymore. That urge to punch a wall has been dissipated, so you're not fighting it. And then you assess your values, or I assess my values, and then sometimes if it's really fucking like up there, I'll go on a run or I'll go work out. And then generally that's enough to simmer me down where I can come back with a clear mind and actually solve the problem. Anyway, so the point that I'm trying to make here is every person is different. Every circumstance is different, right? So I'm talking about irritating events with anger. It could be anger at your spouse or at your kids, and you have to reassess, how is this anger going to serve me in my relationship with my kids? What kind of a relationship do I want to have with my kids in 5 years from now? Is reacting this way going to lead to that? And then when you get that clarity of mind, that might dissipate the anger enough that you can, that the emotion is gone, the impulse is gone, and you have clarity of mind, or there are more steps that you have to add. But it takes experimentation, it takes critical thinking, it takes problem solving skills to eventually build out these systems for whatever impulses or emotions you're trying to deal with and you're trying to get a hold of and be free from in some sense. But I think it's doable. I think it's very doable. And just saying things like, I think this is where I have difficulty at church. I don't know, I did one video before and I decided to restart and do this video. I mentioned I was at church this morning. Something that I have difficulty with a lot is they just say, don't be angry. Being angry is bad. But they don't talk about how there are systems that you need to put into place in order to move through that. Once you're convinced that you don't want to do something, that you don't want to carry out a behavior pattern or be the servant of a certain emotion, once you recognize that, you need to start creating a process to get through it. And it's worth recognizing that each time you punch a wall, as long as you're trying out a process or you're trying out a system, a state change system, it's giving you feedback and it's helping you figure out what works and what doesn't. If you take 3 deep breaths and then you punch a wall, it's like maybe next time you got to take 4 deep breaths, man. I don't know. Or maybe you need to philosophize and think more deeply about the consequences of a certain emotion, or let's say in the context of insecurity, perhaps your social philosophy is off. I know a lot of people in the world of self-development have this belief, especially like the charismatics, have this belief that every conversation should be dynamic and fantastic if you know what you're doing and you have the right conversational skills. You'll have all these great conversations. And I used to kind of have that attitude, and every time I had a bad conversation, I'd be like, okay, I gotta figure out what went wrong there. And then there was just so much pressure. And eventually I met honestly, one of my best friends in the world, and he has this great social conception or social philosophy, which is third spaces, which is that you come to an interaction with somebody, and through the melding of your personalities, you create a third space. And that third space is always going to be better when you're authentic. But sometimes when two people are being authentic, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with either individual, it's like the mixture of ingredients does not result in a tasty meal, right? There are some ingredients that are good with these things, there are some ingredients that are good with these things. But when you put these two ingredients together, it just, the flavors don't match. And sometimes when two good people are interacting authentically, it doesn't create a good space. And there's an importance and a certain level of confidence that comes from recognizing that you are experimenting with third spaces, and it's not entirely up to you to assess the other person's personality and react strategically in order to create the optimal social experience. And by switching that social philosophy, it becomes a lot easier to create positive social experiences with the people whose personality has the highest potential to create a solid third space with you. Whereas it's maybe going to be a little bit less optimal with people with whom's personality you might have more conflict with or less compatibility with. Anyway, now I do think that there's value in having strategic social skills. Going to a friend's birthday party and finding the optimal third space is a lot different than going to a business meeting and needing to create an optimal third space by analyzing their personality and understanding how you interact with most people and adjusting how you interact in order to make the proceedings lead to the most optimal outcome for your business, right? There's a lot of power to social strategy, but social strategy can lead to a lot of insecurity, and a lot of people can put their sense of self-worth into social strategy. Anyway, all of this, the point that I'm trying to fucking make here is that the philosophy that you bring to certain things like insecurity and socializing, the philosophy that you bring to it is going to affect the way that you move from certain states into certain states. So if you're in an insecure state and you're doing certain practices, but those practices aren't getting you out of your state, sometimes you have to assess your philosophy and then insert into your system, your state change system or process. You have to introduce philosophizing, reassessing, reanalyzing, recognizing that, you know what, when a awkward silence takes place and this person leaves, it's not this person responding to me, it's just the way that this person responds to awkward silences. Some people are really good at sitting in awkward silence, and then that can lead to laughter or more positive situations. And honestly, when two people sit in awkward silence together, it creates a lot of comfortability between them. And then on the other side of that awkward silence, you'll find that conversation starts to flow much more smoothly. But people who are afraid of awkward silence, you might be in conversation with them, you don't know what to say, they don't know what to say, they're just responding to the awkward silence, they get the hell out of there. That's fine, it is what it is, man. But it's much more valuable to be, anyway, I'm going off on tangents here. you can change these philosophies. You can reassess these philosophies, change these philosophies, and these philosophies are going to affect the way that you go through state change. But if you've come to the conclusion and you have an understanding of why you don't want to fucking be an angry person, then you can't force that state change. You have to, I guess, in conclusion, you have to learn how to create a system that induces state change instead of trying to force state change. That's really the point that I'm trying to get at here. I guess that means there are kind of two elements to it. One is the philosophies that you have regarding the states, and then the other is the system that you have in place to change your state. And maybe if one is lacking, you have to build that up a little bit. And thinking about your philosophy can be a part of your system. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I'm gonna throw this bad boy on YouTube. It's a long video. It was a rant. It was a ramble. But I hope people enjoyed it. I hope just one individual out there got value from this, because I had this thought in church this morning, and it really it hit me hard, and it was very helpful in me looking at some things that I'm trying to change in my life now and recognizing, I just got to put a system in. I just got to create a system, and I just got to work on that system. And by working on that system, it's going to help me deal with this. And I've done that in the past. It's helped me quit weed. It's helped me quit cigarettes. It's helped me build healthy habits. It's helped me introduce workout as a routine in my life that is consistent and stable. It's helped me build good sleep habits, all these things. I actually have systems for sleep habits. If my sleep habits are bad, a system I do to transition from a bad sleep habit state to a good sleep habit state involves, I think I've talked about this before, and this is a broader state, right? This is a lifestyle state as opposed to an impulse or emotional state. But when I'm in a state of bad sleep habits, I look to substances to actually help me change that. Caffeine and melatonin. If I'm staying up late, I can't get to sleep, I start taking melatonin at, let's say, 9 o'clock, and then that gets me to sleep by 9:30, 10. Then I put caffeine right next to my bed, and when my alarm goes off at 6 a.m. or 5:30, whatever that is, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, but I slam that caffeine, and then that jolts me up and gets me out of bed, right? And then I'm tired all day, but whatever. And I do that for a couple of days. I go see the sunrise. By seeing the sunrise, that starts to reset your circadian rhythm. And then when I do that for a couple of days, bam, I'm locked back into a good sleep schedule. And yeah, switching to a good sleep schedule is something that, it took me years to figure out that system, but now I've got that system and it works really fucking well. So I guess the conclusion, I've already concluded this. The end. Bye-bye. What is the thing that I want to say when I end these videos? Quit the wishing, quit the bitching, start the mission. See you next time, folks.